You thought awakening would feel like arriving, like finally stepping into the light after years of wandering in the dark. But instead, it feels like everything is crumbling. The ambition that once lit your fire, gone. The dreams you spent years chasing, they feel like they belonged to someone else. You used to be driven, maybe even obsessed with becoming someone. But now you wake up, stare at the ceiling, and ask yourself, what's the point? This isn't depression, it's not laziness, it's something deeper, something sacred. And Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychologists, saw this long before the modern world had words for it. You're not lost. You're disoriented because the map you were using just disintegrated, and you're holding the ashes for most of your life. Your motivation came from a version of you that you didn't realize was a mask. Jung called it the persona, the part of you shaped to survive, the achiever, the pleaser, the rebel, the perfectionist. You thought that was you, so you built your life around it, to a career, your relationships, your dreams, and then something happened. Maybe it was a crisis, maybe it was a moment of deep stillness, maybe you just woke up one day and everything that used to excite you now felt hollow. That was the awakening. You saw the machinery behind your life, the chasing, the proving, the validation seeking, and suddenly it didn't make sense anymore. Not in an angry way, not even in a dramatic way, just quietly, like a switch flipped, and no one told you where the new light was. Jung warned us, enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's what you did. You saw the patterns, the ego games, the illusions. But now you're standing in a kind of internal silence, waiting for something new to emerge, and nothing's coming. And that's what no one tells you about awakening. The real silence isn't outside, it's inside. The goals that once pulled you forward now feel fake. The mantras don't work. The motivational speeches sound hollow, because they were all designed for a version of you that no longer exists. You didn't just lose motivation. You outgrew the fuel that once powered you. Your ego, the one that gave your life structure, is now confused. It's not dead, it's disoriented. Because for the first time, it's no longer running the show. And that's terrifying for the part of you that was taught to do more, be more, prove more. And yet, your soul, your deeper self, is whispering, stop, not because you failed, but because the old game is over. You're in between lives, in between selves. You're not who you used to be, but the new you hasn't fully formed. This is what Jung called the liminal space, the sacred in-between. The cocoon phase, where the caterpillar turns to mush before becoming something else entirely. And yeah, that mush doesn't hustle. It doesn't grind. It dissolves. This isn't failure. It's transformation. But it's a transformation that our modern world doesn't know how to honor, because we worship progress, productivity, clarity. So when you stop chasing, stop striving, stop performing, the world looks at you like you're broken. But you're not broken. You're becoming. Still, it's hard to explain this to others. Even harder to explain it to yourself. You try to journal, meditate, make sense of it. But words don't work here. Logic doesn't work here. Because this space is not meant to be understood. It's meant to be lived through. So you float. You scroll. You try to care about the things you used to care about, but they don't stick. You might even get scared. Am I losing myself? But the truth is you're shedding yourself, the self you thought you needed to be. And Jung knew this was necessary. He called it individuation, the process of becoming your true self. Not the self shaped by trauma, not the self designed to win love or approval, but the self that's rooted in soul, and the path to soul. It goes straight through the dark, not the bad kind of dark, the ancient kind, the fertile kind, the kind where seeds sprout in silence, the kind where old identities dissolve and something unshakable begins to stir beneath the surface. But here's the catch. Most people run from this place. They feel the silence and think it means something's wrong. So they rush to fix it. They start new projects, take a course, book a trip, anything to distract from the void. Because stillness true, soul level stillness is terrifying, but not to the self. The self knows this stillness is sacred. The self doesn't scream. It doesn't panic. It waits. It watches. It listens. It builds. And it's building you. This inner reconstruction doesn't happen with checklists. It doesn't happen on a timeline. You can't speed it up. You can only surrender to it. And that surrender will feel like death to your ego, because it is. But it's also a birth. You're not here to go back. You're here to create something new, a new life, a new identity, a new way of being that isn't built from fear or lack or need. It's built from truth. And the truth is, you were never broken. You were always being broken open. Asterisk, you begin to realize that this emptiness, the stillness that once scared you isn't absence, it's space. Space that used to be filled with noise, goals that weren't yours, identities borrowed from others, dreams shaped by old wounds. Now that it's quiet, the real you has room to breathe. But breathing isn't the same as building, not yet, because you're still waiting, still watching, still suspended between two worlds, the one you outgrew and the one not yet born. And this in-between is brutal, isn't it? You miss the fire that used to drive you, even if it was built on fear. At least fear had momentum. Now, you drift. You wake up and feel no spark, no pull. Just the ache of still being here, without knowing why. But Jung would tell you this is where the real work begins. He warned that the modern world teaches us to fear this phase. It gives us labels, unproductive, lazy. But this isn't pathology, it's initiation. It's the part of the journey where your ego surrenders the throne and your self begins to rise, not with a roar, but with a whisper, and you must become quiet enough to hear it. This is not a crisis of capability, it's a crisis of identity. The old you was designed to fit in, to achieve, to prove, to survive. But the awakened you were never meant to survive. We were meant to transform. The ego asks, what do I do next? The self asks, what wants to emerge? So you stop forcing, you stop performing. You start paying attention to the things that stir you, not excite you, stir you. The strange curiosity, the wordless resonance. A feeling, not a plan. That's your soul speaking. It's subtle at first. A pull toward silence. A return to the books you loved before life demanded productivity. An idea that keeps echoing in your chest, even though it makes no sense yet. These aren't distractions. They're breadcrumbs. And here's the shift that changes everything. You stop asking, how do I get my motivation back? You start asking, what is this space trying to teach me? Because Jung taught that when the unconscious rises, it doesn't bring clarity. It brings chaos first. Why? Because everything false must fall away before the real can rise. You can't plant a forest on top of a lie. The soil has to be stripped, turned, broken open. That's what's happening now. You are being broken open, but not to be emptied, to be filled. The goals that used to excite you, they feel meaningless because they weren't aligned with yourself. They were shaped by your wound, your need to be seen, to prove your worth, to survive. And now that you've seen the wound, you can't pretend it's not there. You can't go back to chasing illusions. You can only move forward into truth. And truth doesn't always come with energy. Sometimes it comes with exhaustion. Because letting go of your old identity is grieving. You're mourning who you were, who you pretended to be. You're mourning the version of you that tried so hard to be enough. And grief takes time, energy, presence, space, asterisk. So of course you feel tired. Of course you feel foggy. You're not malfunctioning, you're metabolizing. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Because here's what most people don't understand. Motivation isn't lost. It's rooting, and roots grow in darkness. The new you, the one aligned with soul, doesn't chase recognition. It doesn't hustle for approval. It moves differently. It listens first, then acts. It doesn't ask, will this make me successful? It asks, is this true? And that is terrifying to a world built on performance. But once this shift happens, everything starts to realign. You stop seeking inspiration. You become inspiration. Not because you're trying, but because you're honest. Because your presence no longer comes from strategy, it comes from integrity. The alignment between your inner and outer life begins to stabilize. And with that, a new kind of energy returns. Not the frantic, anxious kind, but a quieter, more stable fuel. Soul-led action. It doesn't shout, it doesn't sparkle, but it moves with gravity, and people feel it. They may not understand it, they may even resist it, but they'll sense that something in you has changed. You no longer need to convince. You are. Jung called this the symbolic life, when you no longer live from ego, but from the deeper intelligence within. Your dreams become less about escaping and more about embodying. Your success is no longer about comparison, but about coherence. You become whole, not perfect whole. And there's a difference. Perfection is sterile. It performs. Wholeness is messy, honest, alive. It includes the shadow, the grief, the rage, the longing. And instead of cutting these parts off, you integrate them. You listen. You welcome them back into the circle of who you are. This is what individuation means, not becoming ideal, but becoming complete. And from that completeness, something beautiful begins to bloom. Not motivation, but meaning. You no longer need a reason to act. You move because something within you moves. A resonance, a truth, a knowing. And suddenly, life begins to flow again. Not all at once, not in a burst, but in ripples, quiet invitations, subtle alignments. The fog doesn't clear overnight, but you no longer need it to, because you've learned to walk through mystery with open eyes. Asterisk. You begin to feel it soft at first, like a heartbeat beneath the noise. Not the manic urgency of the old life, but a quiet rhythm rising from somewhere. Deeper. You don't always have words for it, but you know the difference. This isn't pressure, it's presence. And here's the paradox. The more you surrender your need to figure it out, the more life begins to organize itself around you, not in a perfect way, not in a fairy tale way, but in a way that feels right. Like puzzle pieces, long scattered now, finding their place. You meet people who mirror the truths you're just starting to name. Opportunities appear not because you chased them, but because you became ready to receive them. Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And now, you see how all your effort to fix yourself only reinforced the illusion that something was broken. But you were never broken, you were buried. And the excavation was never punishment. It was permission. Now, in this new clarity, something unexpected begins to bloom. Compassion for the person you were before the awakening, the one who clung to old goals, performed for approval, got lost in distraction. That wasn't weakness. That was adaptation. That version of you was doing the best they could with the tools they had. And now, with love not judgment, you begin to release them. You don't need to disown your past to become whole. You need to reclaim it. The ego tries to prove its value. The self simply expresses it. And now you feel the shift. You're not interested in hustling to earn your place. You're here to bring something through. A message, a medicine, a frequency. And even if the world never claps for it, to still offer it. Because that offering is you. You don't need to go viral to be valuable. You don't need a title to be impactful. You simply need to be aligned. And from alignment, motivation returns. But it doesn't look like it used to. It's not caffeine-fueled ambition or deadline-driven panic. It's steady, patient, unmistakable. It rises not from fear of failure, but from reverence for truth. And you realize now, it's not that you lost your purpose. It's that your old purpose was never really yours. It was inherited, copied, compensatory. But now something truer is taking its place. Not a plan, but a path. Not a checklist, but a compass. And that compass points inward first, then outward. You used to ask, what should I do with my life? Now you ask, what is life asking to do through me? And that's when the real clarity arrives. You stop measuring your days by what you accomplished and start noticing how you felt. Did I move in alignment? Did I act from truth? Did I speak from center? You no longer chase impact. You become impact because your presence itself carries energy. A presence not driven by wanting to be seen, but by finally seeing yourself. And when others ask, what changed? You struggle to explain. How do you describe a death that birthed you? You begin to live in paradox. You feel both grounded and expanding, still and wildly alive, quiet and fierce. You learn to hold opposing truths without needing to resolve them. That's what integration looks like, not choosing one side, but becoming whole enough to hold both. And now, when the fog returns, and it will, you don't panic. You don't make it mean something's wrong. You remember, this too is sacred. This too is soul work. Sometimes silence is not absence. It's incubation, because the self doesn't rush. The self doesn't perform. The self gestates. You move through your days differently now. Less reaction, more reflection, less noise, more nuance. You start asking questions no one taught you to ask. What makes me feel quietly alive? What am I no longer willing to abandon in myself? What kind of world do I want to build, not for applause, but for alignment? And you don't always have the answers, but you keep listening, because the listening itself has become holy. You stop trying to find your voice and realize you've been speaking all along. You just weren't listening. You thought your truth would sound like a trumpet, but it was always a whisper. And now you hear it clearly, without needing validation, without needing to defend it. You are no longer seeking a role in someone else's script. You are writing your own. And with that, a quiet fire returns, not to achieve, but to offer, not to prove, but to participate. to contribute to something larger than you without needing to control it. That is where real power lives, not in force, but in flow. You begin to notice beauty in strange places. Noticing becomes prayer. Simplicity becomes medicine. Slowness becomes strength. The world hasn't changed, you have. And so your experience of the world transforms alongside you. You no longer ask the world to give you purpose. You bring purpose to the world. You walk with a quieter confidence, no, not because you have answers, but because you've learned how to live inside the questions. You don't fear uncertainty, you honor it, because you know that within uncertainty lives the only place where something new can be born. And in the end, this is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not someone better, not someone higher, someone truer, someone whole." Asterisk. And then, without warning, you notice something you hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet joy. Not the euphoric highs that come and go like waves. Not the kind of joy you chase with events, people, or praise, but a deep, grounded contentment. A subtle smile from the soul. You catch it in ordinary moments, sunlight breaking through your window, a conversation that flows with ease, a sudden wave of gratitude washing over you without cause. You realize this is what it feels like to be home in yourself, because now you're not constantly reaching. You're not trying to become someone else. You're remembering who you've always been underneath the layers, the striving, the masks. The self doesn't need to scream for attention, it radiates. Carl Jung called this the symbolic life, a way of being where the external world and your inner reality mirror each other. You're no longer fighting your experience, you're in dialogue with it. Dreams become messages, setbacks become initiations, coincidences become synchronicities. You begin to live as if the universe is speaking directly to you, and somehow, it always was. You just weren't listening with the right ears. And here's where the transformation completes its cycle, not with fireworks, but with intimacy. You no longer chase the peak experiences, the spiritual highs. You don't need the mountaintop moments to prove you're growing. You've learned that real awakening is not in escaping the world, but in embodying yourself within it, fully, authentically, tenderly, fiercely. You walk slower, but with more direction. You speak less, but with more clarity. You make fewer moves, but with more meaning, because now everything is infused with awareness. Even your no is sacred. Even your boundaries are acts of love. And when others look at you, some won't understand the shift. That's okay. You didn't do this for them. You did it for truth. But some, just a few, will feel it. Not because you preach, not because you teach, but because you live it. And your presence becomes a permission slip, not to follow you, but to return to themselves. You realize that's how change spreads, not through force, not through conversion, but through the quiet, undeniable energy of someone who has become real. You become an anchor in the storm, not because you never drift, but because you always return. You become a mirror, not one that flatters, but one that reveals. You become the kind of person whose silence speaks louder than most people's shouting. And most of all, you become trustworthy to your own soul. You stop betraying yourself for comfort. You stop shrinking to fit in rooms you've outgrown. You stop trading truth for acceptance and clarity for approval. You don't just honor your intuition, you obey it. This is what it means to live after awakening, not in disillusionment, not in numbness, but in sacred integration. You carry your shadow and your light with equal grace. You don't hide your humanity to appear enlightened. You embrace it to become whole, and the world will still pull at you. There will be noise, demands, distractions. But now you have an inner sanctuary. You return to it every day, not just in meditation, but in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you choose. That's what makes it real. That's what makes it yours. So if you're here wondering why you feel lost after your awakening, know this: it's because the map was never meant to guide you forward. It was meant to lead you inward, to the place you forgot, to the voice you buried, to the power you feared, to the love you didn't believe you deserved. But now you've seen it. Now you've felt it. Now you are it. And even if the world forgets your name, you won't forget who you are. Because once you've awakened to the truth of your being, there's no going back, only going deeper, only going home. Welcome.